farms equal healthy rivers. Thank you, Michael. And Michael, if you would help me admit people if that is easy for you to do. I'm not able to disable the waiting room yet, but hi folks. Yeah, welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining. We are recording today's presentation and it will be uploaded on our One Mississippi YouTube channel in a couple of days, and I'll be sure to send the link out to everyone as well. But thank you all for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started here. I bet many of you are familiar with MRN and our One Mississippi program, but for those who are not familiar, we are the Mississippi River Network. MRN is a coalition of nearly 70 organizations and small businesses, all working together to protect the land, water, wildlife, and people of our greatest river, the Mississippi. Our network implements the only national public program of its kind for the river called One Mississippi, which is designed to educate, engage, and inspire everyday folks to take action to protect our Mississippi River. Since 2009, One Mississippi has recruited 20,000 river citizens and inspired thousands of actions. And I know many, if not all of you here are probably river citizens. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a river citizen and for everything that you already do to protect our Mississippi River and our communities. And if you are not a river citizen yet, I invite you to please join us. You can click the link in the chat and sign up to become a river citizen. Join this community of folks who care about the river. My name is Maisa Khan. I'm the policy director at the Mississippi River Network. I'm joined by my colleagues, Michael Anderson and Kelly McGinnis. You'll hear from Michael at the end of this webinar. We're all here to be resources for you on any and everything that you hear about today and lots more. But with that, what we are here to talk about today is the Farm Bill and our Mississippi River. And the fun part of being part of a network is that we are always learning and collaborating with amazing partners, partner organizations. And I just wanted to give a big shout out and thank you to our MRN member organizations whose work and expertise I'm always drawing from, always inspired by, and will be referencing their work and a lot of the resources that they have already throughout this webinar. So the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, or NSAC, the Isaac Walton League of America, and one of our state-based advocacy organizations, the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. We have lots more. We have members in in all 10 states that the Mississippi River flows through, but just wanted to shout them out. And in addition to watching the recording of this webinar, if you want to hear our colleagues at NSAC, Isaac Walton League, or the Illinois Stewardship Alliance talk about these same issues, you can check out our webinar from last summer that's posted on our YouTube channel. So just a shout out to them. But what we will be talking about today, going over the flow a little bit for today's webinar. First, just digging into the connection between the river and agriculture and the Farm Bill. And then from there, we will kind of narrow into what exactly is the Farm Bill anyway. What are the specific conservation programs that impact the health of the river? And then finally, we're going to have a brand new, hot off the press action for you all to take. And you all are our first to kind of see this action, respond to it, and get a advanced peek into what we will be working on and amplifying throughout River Days of Action. So stick around till the end to be part of that. But with that, let's dig in. So we're all river people here. why should we care about the Farm Bill? And I suspect that if you're here, you already have an inkling about what the connections might be, but let's get into it. So my first slide, we're going to look at a map of the Mississippi River's watershed, and I'm sure this is a familiar map to many of you. Our Mississippi River's watershed is tremendous. The river forms the border or flows through 10 states. Those are the 10 main stem states that MRN focuses on, but all or part of 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces drain into the river, totaling over 40% of the contiguous US. And the Mississippi River Basin accounts for 90% of all freshwater flow to the Gulf of Mexico. So we see here the shaded map, the shaded area in the map shows us the full extent of the watershed, which includes all of the river's major tributaries. So you have the Missouri River, you have the Ohio River, and just as with a raise of hands through your reactions or physically raise your hands, how many of you all live in the shaded area or within the Mississippi River's watershed? Fabulous. I'm sure it is many of you. So let's look at another map. We're going to have a series of maps here. Again, so if we think about where the Mississippi, we just saw the Mississippi River's watershed, this map is showing us the percentage of land devoted to growing 6 major categories of crops. So we have corn, soy, wheat, cotton, hay, and a catch-all category of everything else, fruits, nuts, and vegetables. The darker the shading, the higher percentage of land is used to grow that crop. So we can see here, if we're following, again, the main artery of the Mississippi River from its headwaters in Minnesota all the way down to the Gulf, there is a high concentration of land being used to grow crops. And then again, if we look at the 2 major tributaries, the Missouri River with its headwaters, and the Ohio River from the northeast, especially in the upper Mississippi River Basin, the concentration of crops being grown in this region is very high. Corn covers more land in the US than any other crop. The second is soy, and the majority of corn and soy go to feeding livestock. Almost 50% of corn goes to ethanol. So this concentration of crops being grown are mostly going to filling tanks and feeding animals in confinement. And we can see just how much of that is concentrated, again, in the upper river especially, and then following the artery down the river. In the next map, we're going to look at, we're seeing the value of both crop and livestock operation in the US. So the greener areas are deriving the most value from crop production. The redder areas are deriving the most value for raising livestock. Again, if we think about the artery of the 10 main stem states, the main flow of the Mississippi River from the headwaters in Minnesota down to the Gulf, you can see that high concentration, especially of green, so value derived from crop production. And then again, looking at 2 major tributaries, the Missouri River and the Ohio River, we're following this very dense, more of the red up there in the upper Mississippi River Basin. And then finally, our last map, kind of putting it all together. We saw how expansive the river's watershed is, and we know that what happens in one part of the river has an impact on the rest of the river. And every time we are engaging in anything really, but in this case, every time we engage in livestock or crop production, we have a choice. It can happen in a sustainable way or in a degrading way. And we know especially the process of growing monocultures is environmentally taxing. So monocultures like corn and soy require tremendous fertilizer inputs that unfortunately run off into our waterways. 150,000 tons of phosphorus and 1.3 million tons of nitrogen flow into the Gulf of Mexico every year. 2 tons of soil is eroded for every 1 ton of corn that is produced. And again, most of these monocultures are going to filling gas tanks and feeding animals in confinement. So that's kind of the overlay, that the back map. In the front, I also have a picture of the Gulf dead zone. So what happens over the course of the watershed, those excess fertilizers, you may see them having an impact on your local lakes, your ponds, from beach closures to harmful algal blooms that can impact family members and pets, compounded over the entire Mississippi River's watershed. We see huge impacts like the dead zone that happens every year. And then the smaller graph at the bottom, maybe a little bit hard to see, but is the extent. It's showing the size of the dead zone over time as measured by the Gulf Hypoxia Task Force. And there's a dotted line at the very bottom. That's a goal that the Gulf Hypoxia Task Force has had to decrease the size of the dead zone. And since measurements began 1985, we're nowhere near achieving that goal. So despite, a lot of great practices and a lot of good things happening, we still have a really long way to go to see an impact in the entire watershed. The other thing I'm going to point out in this map is just the concentration of the kind of land that we have along the Mississippi River is mostly privately owned land. So a lot of times when we think about conservation or doing conservation work, folks kind of go into a mindset of where can we fence off a place and keep people out of it, keep industry out of it. And that's really not an option that we have in the Mississippi River watershed. Most of our land is privately owned, so we have to think about ways where we get a both and solution. So not only are we able to maybe produce crops on the land, but we're also getting a conservation impact. And that is where the Farm Bill comes in. So what is the Farm Bill? The Farm Bill is the single most important piece of legislation related to our agricultural system. It shapes what we eat, what farmers can grow, who can access land and capital, and how all of that impacts our waterways and the environment. So it's helpful to start with a little bit of history before we dig into the nuts and bolts of the Farm Bill. Our Farm Bill today is what we call a piece of omnibus legislation, which just means it's a large multi-part bill that contains lots of programs, policies, and funding. The original Farm Bill dates all the way back to the Dust Bowl. The picture here we have of the Dust Bowl, and the original Farm Bill was really 3 separate but related bills enacted in the 1930s as part of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal legislation. So the Farm Bill came about as a means to address 2 concurrent problems. First, low prices for farmers due to overproduction, and 2, extensive hunger and poverty, both on and off farms. Early farm bills also sought to tackle catastrophic erosion and soil loss from drought and poor land stewardship, e.g. Dust Bowl, lack of credit for small farmers, basic rural infrastructure needs, unfair export and trade policies, and lots more. These historic origins can still be seen in the outlines of our current farm bills today. However, it's important to name that those early farm bills also, in many cases, explicitly excluded farmers of color and communities of color in how their programs were set up and delivered, and directly contributed to generations of land loss. For example, refusing to give loans or denying program payments, which drove land loss for Black and Indigenous farmers, or immigration policies that exploited the labor of people of color while excluding them from accessing the land and capital to farm. That's all on top of the stolen land and labor underpinning our agricultural system that goes back to the founding of this country. I say all of this because this historical context is important because we are still navigating it today. And you don't need to dig very hard into our policies to see where this racism is built into the structures that continue to play out in our current food and farm policy. And I mention it because just as much as there are opportunities for us to uplift and support and increase some components of the Farm Bill, there's also a lot of undoing that we need to do, to address some of this institutional racism that's built in. So continuing on, what is the Farm Bill? Like all of these 1,000-page books, the Farm Bill is over 1,000 pages in length. So it is a massive undertaking. It is written or reauthorized every 5 years. So to continue kind of the book analogy, you can think that every 5 years we have a new edition of the Farm Bill that's out. The year that the Farm Bill is passed is usually the name of its book edition. So right now we are in Farm Bill, we're operating under the 2018 Farm Bill, and we are currently writing the next Farm Bill, which is why this is a great year to learn more about the Farm Bill. It's a reauthorizing year, so Congress has a deadline to write the next Farm Bill by the end of this year. These 1,000 pages direct the spending of over $40 billion. It contains policies, programs, funding, everything from rules about who is eligible for a farm loan to funding for food assistance for low-income families. And again, every Farm Bill is also a reflection of the deep-seated structural inequities and harms that it was based on. Because the Farm Bill is so lengthy, Congress often works on it through smaller chunks. This is called marker bills. I'm not going to get into this, but as you dig into the Farm Bill and maybe see advocacy alerts from us or from our partners, you might see us supporting marker bills. These are a way that that Congress can write smaller chunks or chapters of the Farm Bill that aren't passed in and of themselves, but get baked into the larger Farm Bill at the very end. All right. Secondly, another way to kind of break up this huge piece of legislation is into chapters. So each Farm Bill is organized into different sections called titles. So you might hear me say chapters to kind of continue my book analogy, but in policy speak, there are titles within the Farm Bill, and each title addresses a specific aspect of the Farm Bill. The number and content of the title can vary a little bit from Farm Bill to Farm Bill, but generally, the big ones stay the same, and they have contained these 12 titles for the last couple of Farm Bills. Next slide. So looking at those titles in terms of the amount funded in each, although there are 12 titles in the Farm Bill, there are really 4 that comprise most of the spending that goes into a Farm Bill. So you see here in this pie chart, The biggest piece of the pie, almost 80%, goes to the nutrition title. So that's where programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, lives. The other three big ones are crop insurance, commodities, and conservation. So each of those have less than 10%, between 7 and 9%. And then everything else, all 8 other titles, comprise the remaining 1% of funding in the farm bill. So that's where local food systems, for example, farmers markets, that all lives in that other less than 1%. Next slide. What is not in the farm bill? And every time I present about the farm bill, someone invariably brings up something that is not in the farm bill. So everything in this slide is not in the farm bill, even though these issues are directly related to agriculture and are very important. They are not in the farm bill because they fall outside the jurisdiction of the House and Senate Agriculture Committees, who are responsible for passing the farm bill. So all of these things are considered under the jurisdiction of a different committee. So for example, farm worker rights and protections, this very important issue. I've been seeing a lot come out recently about this. Very important, but fall under the jurisdiction of the House Education and Labor Committee and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. So doesn't fall under the Farm Bill. Or something that is important to all of us, the Clean Water Act. Obviously, we've seen there's a connection between ag and clean water, and the Clean Water Act kind of decides what kinds of pollutants might end up into our waterways. So anything specific to the Clean Water Act and complying with the Clean Water Act is under the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works or the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So specific Clean Water Act violations are not covered under the Farm Bill. Okay. We're slowly sinking into a little bit of wonkiness, and then we'll get back out, don't worry. So this is a little bit of my, it's gonna be farmhouse rock for a slide or two here, how a bill becomes a law. So we know what the Farm Bill kind of covers. What does the actual text of a farm bill, of the legislation, do? What does the text do? So almost all of the legislation in a farm bill is authorizing language. And that's sort of, that creates a program to exist. So each bill kind of follows 3 main stages. This first authorizing stage lays out the purpose of a piece of legislation. What does it do? Its duration, how long will it last? How is it funded, which is very important. It can either have mandatory types of funding that is required year after year, or it can have discretionary funding, which gives, we'll talk about in a minute, appropriators the ability to kind of change how much a specific program gets year to year. Authorizing language has information about who can access it, and the Farm Bill is reauthorized every 5 years. So again, that edition of the book is reauthorized every 5 years. Different pieces of legislation have different cycles in which they're reauthorized. The next part of any legislation, but here we're going to think about the Farm Bill, is the appropriations process. And that's the process through which we make budget and spending decisions. Again, that has a connection back to what was in the authorizing language. This process happens every single year, and it usually happens after the president releases their budget in early spring, so February or March. And it's a way that many programs within the Farm Bill every year have an opportunity to have decisions made about how much funding they get. And then all throughout the year, whether or not we are in a authorizing year or not, our agencies are implementing Farm Bill programs at the state level. So this is a great time if you're just learning about the Farm Bill or getting into this work. This is a great year to learn about the authorizing process, but there is work happening on the Farm Bill every year. You may be more familiar with the state agencies on the ground who are implementing those programs and that funding. Let's keep going. So this slide is showing the general process for who writes the Farm Bill and a kind of flow of how we expect it to go. So every Farm Bill, at the top, we're still at the very beginning stages of where we're at in terms of where Congress is at in the process. The House Agriculture Committee and the Senate Agriculture Committee get together, they write their own versions of the Farm Bill. So at this stage, they're holding hearings, they're hearing from constituents, they are receiving proposals from folks, and each chamber of our Congress is drafting its own text of the Farm Bill. After each chamber has its own text, they send it to the full floor of the House and the Senate. So it leaves the committee, goes to the full floor, and at that point, each chamber passes its version of the Farm Bill. But usually, since these two processes have been happening on two different tracks, we need to ultimately end up with one Farm Bill. So the House version and the Senate version need to be reconciled. So leaders from each side come together, they create a conference committee where they're looking at the two different versions of the Farm Bill, and they're coming to a consensus about where they can agree, and they take that one version now back to both the House and Senate to pass it, and then hopefully everyone's in agreement, and then it passes both chambers and it goes on to the president for final signature. There are different kinds of opportunities to act at each level of this process. So we will see an opportunity to act at the end, as I mentioned in the beginning. And this is a really great time to tell our Congresspeople the core, the big pieces of the Farm Bill and the big thematic elements that we want to see written into the final Farm Bill. There is no text out there yet, so they're still gathering information. So it's a really important time to act. So those two slides showed what should happen, but the reality is every single Farm Bill process is different. It almost never happens the same way twice, and no two Farm Bills ever really follow the same kind of formula. That's what makes this whole thing fun, right? Or frustrating. One specific kind of challenge that I will share with you all about this particular Congress is that spending especially, and spending in general, is a really tough subject. If you follow the news, it's kind of coming up on any type of legislation or any work that Congress is doing. So in this Congress especially, new funding, new spending is pretty much a non-starter. and negotiating existing spending is going to be a place where there may be fights. So you will see, and we will talk about this in the action at the end, it's very important to advocate for the protection of funding that we already have for the programs that we support. So that brings us into the programs. What are the conservation programs in the Farm Bill? This is really our bread and butter of what we work on and how we see these things play out on the ground. So in the next slide, we're going to look at, again, we're digging into Title II of the Farm Bill, or the conservation title, which is defined as the programs that help farmers implement natural resource conservation efforts on working lands like pasture and cropland, as well as land retirement and easement programs. And as I said at the beginning, the great thing about the conservation title, it's both and. Not only does land, in a lot of cases for the working lands conservation programs we'll talk about in a minute, not only does land in many cases stay in production, but also we're getting a conservation benefit. And by the way, all of these programs under the conservation title are completely voluntary. So farmers opt in to receive this funding. Next slide, we're looking at this pie chart again. So we talked about how the biggest slice of the pie is in the nutrition title, but even though our conservation title up there, the 7%, looks like a small piece of this pie, it is a big chunk of change when we consider how much funding we have here to do conservation work. So it is $30 billion in spending over the 5-year lifetime of a Farm Bill. And then I have a note here at the bottom right. Last year, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, that provides an additional $20 billion in funding for conservation programs. So together, we have the potential of almost $50 billion in funding for conservation programs over the next couple of years. So what I'm going to get into now is we're going to dig into this conservation slice of the pie. What are the programs in the conservation title? So the first set of programs that we have in the conservation title are programs that take land out of production for conservation purposes. So land retirement programs in the Farm Bill pay landowners for temporary changes in land use and management to achieve environmental benefits. So the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, is an example of a land retirement program where a farmer who has maybe less than ideal land, farming land, and is converting it into a grassland or a forested area. The CRP program is a shortish term program. The contract can last 10 to 15 years. So I might have a piece of my land that, for a little bit, I'm going to see how it does as a restored prairie. And then in 10 to 15 years, maybe I do something else. Maybe I keep it in that. The other program I have here is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP. ACEP is an example of a longer term kind of program. So either it's permanent or a 30-year contract. So if I'm a farmer who's getting into a 30-year program, I am thinking long-term. I'm thinking, maybe into the next generation of my land. So an example of what this might look like on the next slide, in the CRP program, so the shorter term program, are prairie strips. I love this image. It's from our friend Omar de Cook Mercado, who's at Mad Agriculture now. But what you see here in this image, again, is a both and. So it's a row crop, but in between there are native perennial prairie plantings. So prairie strips, this is an example of something that you could be eligible for getting funding for through the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP. Next category of funding is the working lands conservation programs. And this really is our bread and butter. This is where the truly like both and programs come in terms of Title II. These are opportunities where landowners not only get to keep their land in production, but also they are achieving conservation outcomes. So the two signature working lands conservation programs are EQIP, which is short for Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. I like to think of these two programs. So the EQIP program is more of a fix-it program. If you have an issue on your land, you can apply for funding through the EQIP program to address that issue. It's kind of a one-to-one. So for example, if I have an erosion issue on my land, I can apply for funding to install terraces. The EQIP program funds practices through 5-year contracts. And again, it's you have a natural resource issue, you are seeking a solution one-to-one, you're fixing it. The Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP, on the other hand, is more of a reward program. And it is a program that is a whole farm kind of systems level program. So I am a farmer who is working on soil health. I might apply for a CSP. I might apply for the CSP program to put in cover crops and a riparian buffer strip and a low tunnel, for example, to have a whole system, a whole conservation system on my land that applies to my whole farm. So let's look at, again, what might these programs look like on farm. So the top picture is a picture of the High Tunnel Initiative in EQIP, which is super popular. Again, if you have a pest control issue, or you might find that a high tunnel, or it's like a barrier, you can grow your crops under, extend your season, you're using fewer inputs, you can apply through EQIP to put up a high tunnel on your farm. And then the bottom picture is showing a farmer. It's a farm tour through the Practical Farmers of Iowa. This is a farmer who has many practices on their land thanks to the Conservation Stewardship Program. They have cover crops, they have buffer strips, so they're using a whole farm approach to look at their land systemically. Next category, second to last category of funding, this is again under Title II, is combination and targeted types of funding. So the example I have up here is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. So RCPP projects are huge regional projects. They might involve multiple different organizations. They might involve your state DNRs or your state conservation departments. They are looking at a targeted area, sometimes at the watershed level, and they're using a whole suite of practices, and they're harnessing this cooperative of many organizations to have an impact. And you'll see in the next slide here, this is showing how many RCPP projects are funded per state. You know, in our 10 state corridor, say, the average is maybe a dozen or less projects. So again, these are very large scale projects. RCPP also has some incentives to do projects that address critical watersheds, and the Mississippi River is a critical watershed. So if you are applying for RCPP funding within the Mississippi River, you get an extra boost if your work impacts the river. So a couple of examples of RCP projects, there's tons, really cool projects, but Tennessee, there's a project in Tennessee that's restoring native plant and pollinator habitat. They have the American Bird Conservancy, Quails Forever, Southeastern Grasslands Initiative, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and 6 other conservation partners all working together on this restoration project. So that gives you an idea of the kind of scale of an RCPP project. And then finally, last category of types of projects in Title II is planning and assistance. So this gets into how all of these programs that we just talked about are actually planned, targeted, and promoted to the people who can use them. So this funding directly impacts our state level staff at our agencies like the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. Those are the folks who administer these funds in our state. It determines who is in those field offices working with farmers, educating folks, doing outreach, and making sure that people apply to the program. So it's all great that we have these wonderful programs, but if people do not know about them, then it's a missed opportunity. There's also a equity component to all of this. A lot of beginning farmers, new farmers, farmers of color, who may not be consistently using programs like these, and or we just talked about the systemic racism, the institutional racism that's inherent to many USDA programs. It's important to have staff and outreach programs that are specifically meant to bring in new farmers, beginning farmers, farmers of color, and this is a place where we can do that. So an example of what conservation technical assistance can look like is our Equipping Next Gen Ag Leaders Mentorship Program. So actually the Mississippi River Network, MRN, and Greenlands Blue Waters, a member org, we hosted our first ever mentorship program that was bringing in 12 BIPOC mentees with 9 mentors, all interested in getting into the field of agriculture and conservation, again, so that they can be the folks who are doing outreach to farmers of color, to beginning farmers in the region. And this program was funded through an NRCS Racial Equity Cooperative Agreement, which is a line item under Conservation Technical Assistance. So when we are increasing funding for conservation technical assistance, we can have more programs like these, bringing BIPOC folks into the fold. All right, finally, just some overarching conservation compliance mechanisms that I will just mention here. In order to receive any of the benefits of the Farm Bill, a farmer actually agrees not to destroy wetlands, which is the Swamp Buster program, have a soil conservation program or plan, which is the Sod Buster program, and refrain from destroying delicate prairie pothole ecosystems, which are a special kind of wetland. That's the Sod Saver program. So these are all built into if you receive benefits from any of the titles, so if you're getting a commodities subsidy or anything, you are agreeing to do these things. But my personal feeling is that, we have had these programs in place for many years. And if we're thinking back to that slide that's showing the dead zone, clearly these compliance mechanisms are not enough to kind of reverse the declines that we've seen at the watershed scale. So there's a lot more we need to do, which is a great segue into how can we take action on these issues, and let Congress know about the connection between these issues and our care for the Mississippi River. So maybe with that, I will turn it over to you, Michael.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maisa. Well, I know most folks are off camera, maybe eating lunch, just taking in all this information, but I'll kick off a round of applause. Thank you, Maisa, so much for that incredible walkthrough. It's amazing how every time I have the opportunity to hear this, I learn something new. So thank you for your level of information and the way you shared it with us, and for everyone here showing up today and wanting to learn, right? So as Maisa shared, let's take action. And so I'm actually need to stop sharing my screen here, or rather move out of the PowerPoint. And as Maisa mentioned, I'm just going to share this in the chat right here. And then I'll also pull it up on the screen so we can look at it together. So right now we have an opportunity to reach out to Congress and let them know what is important to us as citizens of the Mississippi River, as people that care about water, as farmers, as eaters, right? We're all part of this agricultural loop. Even if we're not, like, I'm not a farmer myself, I certainly am an eater, right? I love eating food. I love clean water. I have a chance to make a difference and speak up today with regard to the Farm Bill authorization. So what we have going today is our action alert and an opportunity to email Congress asking them to increase protection and funding for Farm Bill conservation programs. As you all know, what we do on land impacts our water, right? Fertilizers, other harmful chemicals, soil from agriculture runoff can harm our streams, rivers, and eventually the ocean. So thankfully, solutions exist. We just got a great walkthrough of many of them from Maisa. And so to keep our cherished Mississippi River and other American waterways healthy, we must support people, practices, and policies that protect clean water in our communities. So that's why we're calling on Congress to increase protection and funding for the Farm Bill conservation programs. These vital programs offer smart solutions that support the local economy and protect people, land, water, and wildlife. But these funds need to be protected and increased to meet the current demand, right? More people are showing interest in expressing demand to subscribe to these conservation programs than what is being able to be offered, right? So that's what we're really asking, not only to protect the funding of Farm Bill conservation programs, but also increase the funding level. So please all make a difference today by speaking up and sending an email via this action alert. It's very, very simple. Add in your information. It'll automatically connect you with your congressional representatives. You can personalize the message. Always encouraged to add a personal touch. Goes a little bit longer, goes a little bit further with our decision makers. And then continuing on the page, in case you need more information, please read on here more about the Farm Bill conservation programs and recapping some of what Maisa presented today. So the link is in the chat, and we'll follow up via email with this action alert as well. Please take it. This, as Maisa said in the beginning, this literally was just launched an hour ago. So you are the first to see it, first to take this action. And what I will also mention is that this action alert you will be joining hopefully thousands of people in taking this action for what we have going with the Mississippi River Network, and that is our River Days of Action. So from June 8th to 18th, we've gathered the network. All of our network member organizations and partners are putting on events in all 10 states the Mississippi River flows through and online, focused on protecting and caring for our Mississippi River, the people, land, water, and wildlife. So we'll also share this in the chat and then can follow up via email as well. You all are invited. Please join in for River Days of Action. And again, if you are able to attend some of these in-person events or online, we also have online events happening. This action alert is what you're going to see circulated and promoted at every single event, right? We're really focused on watershed level collective impact for the people, land, water, and wildlife. And so through this action alert, we're raising our voices together. So please take that action. Check out the River Days of Action website. There's a pretty nifty events calendar going on here. We're 23 days, 10 hours, and 14 minutes out from it kicking off. And we'll share the link in the follow-up email and just encourage everyone to please check out the events. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Maisa.
Thanks, Michael. Any questions for me or Michael? And I will put our contact info in the chat as well. You know, something that we have been thinking about for the last couple of months as it relates to the Farm Bill is there are a lot of new Congress people who are writing their first Farm Bill or are serving in the relevant committees for the first time. So drawing the connection between some of these programs and the impact on the river, I think, you know, we have an opportunity to educate our decision makers just as we're learning about the impacts ourselves. So just another reason to act and a timely kind of connection as folks are potentially thinking about trade-offs or what to fund or what not to fund. I think providing that perspective is important. I have a question. What state agencies administer the local programs? So great question. I would point to your local state NRCS, so the Natural Resources Conservation Service first. And within your NRCS, there's actually a state technical committee or a state technical advisory committee who make really important decisions about how Farm Bill conservation program applications are ranked, for example. With the Inflation Reduction Act, we'll have two kind of pots of funding. One pot of funding coming through the regular Farm Bill process and the other part of funding coming through the Inflation Reduction Act. And those state technical committees within NRCS are making decisions right now about how to get the word out about that funding and also how to make sure that the programs that have the biggest impact on climate and water quality are kind of prioritized to get that funding through IRA. So I would highly encourage you to reach out to your state NRCS, and if you need any help figuring out how to get in touch, feel free to email us.
Mice, I just want to respond to Trevor, your comment about sharing the action alert with our membership, doubling down on what Kelly responded with. Yes, send this action alert far and wide. And for Mississippi River Network and members and partners, organizations like Friends of the Mississippi River, we will prepare ready to use social media copy, email templates for supporters. If any of you are on this call, want any of that sort of promotional and outreach information to help share this action alert, you are welcome to it. We would love to send it to you. Even if you're not a network member organization, you're a part of our River Citizen community. And we thank you so much for taking initiative on helping send it out. We can send you helpful materials to support that promotion. Please email me. Yeah, Trevor.
Yeah, Michael, please do send it to me. I guess the question I'd have, follow-up question is, do we want to kind of hold that until June 8th?
Yeah, really, really great question, Trevor. So, right, the June 8th through 18th are the official River Days of Action dates. Those are really helping be the banks, if you will, to allow River Days of Action to flow in regard to events. This action alert, we're so happy to be able to have it live today. And it'll continue to be live the rest of this month, all the way into River Days of Action, and possibly even after June 18th. So it's open. Action has begun. I just checked. We already have had 5 supporters from this call, because this is the only place where this has been introduced. Already take this action. 15 emails have been sent to our senators and Congress people. So thank you all. The momentum is already underway.
Awesome. Anyone want to get the last question or final thought?
How do the perennial crops fit into the Farm Bill?
Yeah, great question. So right now that that Prairie Strips project, and there's one other practice where the word perennial appears. So there is a lot of room to do more work to encourage specifically perennial types of planting. So I think we're super supportive of that, the CRP program that promotes the buffer strips. Some of our colleagues here are really working on perennial cover crops like Kernza. So not only are you getting just the cover crop benefit, but the perenniality of those crops keeping roots in the ground just has a lot of good impact for water quality and flood mitigation as well. So in terms of the working lands conservation, their programs, the EQIP and CSP, there's literally one area where the word perennial comes up. So we could do a lot better and have a lot more support for perennials.
Under the EQIP program then? And not CRP?
Yes, I think there's a practice in both CSP and EQIP. It's probably the same practice.
Okay.
All right, well, we are at the top of the hour. Again, really appreciate you all taking the time